Perfect. So thank you all for coming to our SBIR or STTR virtual speaker series today. Today, our topic is how to effectively leverage non-dilutive federal funding from the NIH, National Institutes of Health. And to help us with that topic, we have Ahmed Zobi. And a little bit about his background. He is the founder and CEO of Cinter Health Technologies, a medical device company that specializes in automated microfat processing systems. His company has also amassed a patent portfolio of over 30 patents, 20 of which have been granted in the US and globally. And additionally, he is one of Forbes 2021 Next 1000 Inspiring Entrepreneurs and Small Business Leaders. So we are very excited to have him. And if you all have any questions throughout his presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or pop in. And we're very happy to have you all. Take it away, Ahmed, excuse me, and thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. So yeah, feel free to, if you guys want to listen, if you want to ask questions in between, by all means, just, turn on your mic, and more than happy to help out. So today I wanted to talk about NIH funding, how to effectively leverage non-dilutive federal funding. I've been working on my startup for over a decade now. We've leveraged almost now in total non-dilutive funding close to almost $1 million. And I had to learn it by myself. I had a lot of great access to certain individuals and mentors through SBDC, and this is just a culmination of everything that I've learned, and also what I do with a lot of my clients on the side. I help a lot of startups try to get and leverage NIH funding because I think it is important and critical, especially as the venture capital markets kind of push for more companies to have revenue on hand. A lot of startups don't know where else they should get their own capital from, and most of it is from non-dilutive sources like NIH, NSF. But today it's going to be about NIH. So, what is non-dilutive funding? Basically, it's funding that doesn't ever have to be repaid back. These are primarily called grants that you retain equity in your company. You have access to significant funding for research and development because this is what the grants pay for. And then you build credibility. A lot of the most successful companies that I've seen personally have millions of dollars in NIH funding leveraged with venture capital funding because it gets them to a point to where they can go and speak to angel investors or VCs. So a little bit about the NIH program. It focuses on small business that are driving innovation. And this can be done in one of two ways. Getting it from a university tech transfer perspective, which is called a STTR, or developing it yourself, and that's coming from the business internally, and that's through the SBIR program. Now, you don't always have to do an STTR if you're pulling technology from a university. That's if the university is still really connected with the technology. It's that tech transfer can happen. But in instances like ourselves, we developed IP at UCI as undergrads. We graduated and we optioned out and licensed out our own technology, and we went through the SBIR program, which in total is about a $1.2 billion annual budget. But I think a really important fact that people should know is that the STTR budget is actually a lot smaller. It's in the hundreds of millions versus the SBIR budget, which is closer to that $1 billion mark. So what does that mean for you? It means that it's going to be a lot more difficult to land an STTR. You have a higher obstacle in front of you and more competition in front of you for an STTR versus doing it through an SBIR, which allows you to also subcontract work to a university partner or a third party. So same things, it's just SBIR requires 66% and a 33% sub, whereas STTR is a 60-40. So not that much of a difference on the percentage side. So what is the NIH SBIR STTR program? As I mentioned, SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. STTR is a small business technology transfer, and it requires a collaboration with a research institution, whereas SBIR doesn't, but doesn't mean that you can't do a subcontract to a university, like I previously mentioned. And the real goal of NIH, in particular, is to bridge the gap between the innovation and the market solution, because a lot of people think, they have that billion-dollar idea. They have that thing, that idea that Shark Tank would take on, and the investors will come in. But as you truly get into the market space and really understanding, your technology, what is needed from a consumer perspective, there's a lot of stuff that you have to prove out. Technology doesn't just instantly get adopted like that. Now, I'm talking about true, hardcore medical device, biotech, drug development. I'm not talking about SaaS or anything else like that, which has an easier market penetration. But this is why, the SBIR, STTR programs were developed. So eligibility is really important. And I don't go into, too much details on whether you have investors and stuff, because I geared this specific presentation towards early stage startups or people that are thinking about getting their startup up and running. So who can apply? You have to be US based, for-profit small business. The SBC or the SBA, sorry, Small Business Administration defines a small business as under 500 employees, and you have to be majority owned by US citizens or permanent residents, and 51% is majority owned. Project requirements. Every institution is different, but something that's seen across the board is high risk and innovative R&D. Not something that's already been tried, before in the past, and all you're doing is trying to do it again. It really needs to come off as innovative, and it has a commercialization potential. Now, what timeline that commercialization potential is, you normally fit within, your typical timeline. Biotech, if you're developing a new drug, it could be a 5 to 10 year type of runway, whereas medical device, maybe a wearable system, 3 to 4 years, depending on, whether you need human clinical trials, et cetera. So, and all of these are fundable, potential fundable type of objectives under NIH. So this is the process that I normally go through, not only with my company, but with other companies, is really trying to find out if there's anything beyond the typical standard funding procedure, which is primarily called the omnibus solicitation. And what the omnibus solicitation is just all the entities, all the institutions within NIH fall under one clear solicitation, or FOA, and you just toss in your application and they will weed it out and say you belong here and you belong there. However, each institute also has what is called an RFA or a PAR, which is their own specific solicitation for NIH funding and SBIR, STTR funding. And so normally, if you're looking into fundraising, or sorry, into applying for non-dilutive funding, you want to take a first look at the omnibus solicitation. You want to see what institutions are listed there. And the whole process really starts off as a phase one proposal. It's very highly unlikely, depending on the maturity of the technology that you're working with, that you would go directly to a phase two, unless, if this is truly taking it out of the university and they've already done animal studies and they have robust data, then yeah, you could potentially apply for a direct to phase two or a fast track application. But I'm going to go down the path of just what's normal. So phase one proposal, feasibility, proof of concept, depending on the project itself, they're going to want some level of understanding of what do you have, what have you done, what have you accomplished, what is the proof there, right? And then after that's done, let's say you submit that phase one SBIR, you get scored in a fundable zone, you get awarded that SBIR. After completion, typically 6 months to a year. I rarely see any phase one SBIRs really being done in 6 months. So typically the standard is asking for a year timeline. After that, you apply for what is called a phase two SBIR, or a continuation renewal application. And that is basically telling the NIH, hey, we did such a great job with this phase one. We got all of our milestones. We got amazing data that's never before seen, yada, yada. Now we're ready to take this up a notch. And the requirement of a phase two SBIR is really to go into full R&D, whether it's human clinical trials, large animals, maybe conversations with the FDA. That can all be conducted in a phase two proposal. Now, the biggest difference between a phase one and a phase two SBIR, phase one SBIRs are a 6-page research strategy. Phase two SBIRs are 12 pages. Plus, phase two SBIRs require what is called a commercialization plan, which is also 12 pages. So a lot more rigorous work goes into developing out and flushing out a phase two proposal than really in a phase one. So after getting a phase two SBIR, you start your work. Typically, it's a 2-year project is what I normally request when I apply for phase twos. And after getting that award, you could potentially apply for what is called a phase 2B, or what's not written on here is also a commercialization readiness program grant. So you're doing your work, you're doing your research on the side, great. A phase 2B is asking for additional funding that is gearing it towards commercialization. So let's say initially you're asking for funding to go towards large animals in a phase two. Well, you can apply for a phase 2B and say, hey, program officer, we're doing good. Animal studies are looking really good. We had early conversations with the FDA. FDA came back and said, hey, just finish this clinical data and start working on submitting for the FDA. Let's say that was not originally a part of your original budget in the phase two. You can request a phase 2B and say, hey, we need additional funding because we believe that we can get this FDA approval done all under the same umbrella of this phase two and phase 2B application. So you put in that application. Certain institutions, they either do it as an administrative. Other institutions will request that to go through full review panel. And if it goes through full review panel, then you wait typically 6 to 9 months, depending on the situation. So you get to keep doing your phase two SBIR and then hopefully get that phase 2B. And then along with the commercialization readiness program, depending on the institutions and what their funding maximums are, you can go towards, let's say, for example, you're doing the phase 2B for commercialization or FDA, let's say, sorry, and then you request a commercialization readiness program to start working with reimbursement experts. Or now granted, you could do that under phase 2B, but I'm just kind of distinctly separating the two. You could do that with the CRP to talk to reimbursement experts. You could do CRP to, let's say you're a medical device and you need to get to prototype injection molding. You can utilize that funding to really get into the real crux of how do I get from point A to point B on the commercialization spectrum. And then after all of this is done, you have what's called the phase three, which is a market entry. There is no NIH funding at this stage. There are certain programs through NIH Seed, which is their seed office that helps you as an applicant in a startup potentially apply for pitching in front of investors, being taken around certain areas like in California, for instance, and having meetings with investors, because NIH has a list, or at least they have certain partners that ask of NIH, hey, we want to see the best companies that you've funded to date. Can you please send it to us so we can look through and see if we can fund them? So this is just my best practices for crafting a proposal. Obviously, there's a million and one ways to go about this, but this is what I've seen so far successful for myself. The biggest thing that a lot of people think is like, hey, my idea is great. It matches the institution. For example, let's talk about the National Cancer Institute. In no way, shape, or form is this a real life experience, but National Cancer Institute funds cancer-based therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, you name it. And you come up with this new drug that will, eradicate lung cancer. Just because it matches with the institution itself doesn't mean that it will be reviewed well by the reviewers. There are multiple tiers in the application process and the review process. You submit the application, it goes to a review panel. The review panel is where you get the thumbs up or get the thumbs down on your score. And after that review panel is done, it then goes to internal advisory council review. And the advisory council review basically is the entity or the group of people that say, hey, you know what? We're looking at all the projects that we have to date. We are only going to fund anything that has a certain score and below, right? So, for example, I'm just going to use these numbers. In no way, shape, or form are they indicative of any pay line that these institutions have. But let's say NCI's pay line is a 30, right? So you have to score a 30 or below to potentially get funded with them. If you're at a 31, most likely, highly unlikely that it would get funded. I know it's a 1 point difference, but to them, they set their pay lines based off of the application pools that they have. Now, every institution is different. NIA could be different, National Institute of Aging. NCATS could be different, National Institute for Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. All of these institutions can be different. Somebody can have a 20 as the pay line. Somebody can have a 35 as a pay line. So typically, the program officer will not share, but they'll kind of give you they'll give you an indication of whether it would fall or whether they would recommend that you resubmit. So this is why it's critical to understand your reviewer's priorities. A lot of people focus so much time and effort in making a perfect application. You submit it and then it gets not discussed. You just wasted all your time working on a perfect application for it to not be discussed. So there is a free tool on the NIH's website. It's called the ACT or referral tool. So if you Google referral tool, NIH, you can write a description about what you're trying to do, and it will send you out, hey, here are the 5 or 10 review panels that you potentially fall under. You can take those review panels, search them up, look at their members. You're not allowed to communicate with their members because these are confidential review panels, but you can look at the members and see what their background is and understand what their research is. What have they been doing? And then you kind of geared your application towards what they potentially will expect from you. And I think that
Ahmed,
this is critical. Yes.
there's a question in chat.
Oh,
Is being a student required for the STTR funding?
can you clarify what type of student?
Yeah, do unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not a student, but I was just curious because when you had said institutions, for some reason I was just thinking you meant through like a school program or something. But I'm starting.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that makes sense. So to clarify, you just have to sub it out to a university. You have to sub out a portion of the work to the university. So specifically in STTR funding, a university could have, let's say somebody has a patent for this bottle, right? And this bottle can fill up with certain drugs and be transported without having to utilize an insane amount of liquid nitrogen, right? And it could be shipped from one place to the other, again, with no issues to the durability of the drug. If that technology was developed at a university, and you as a, let's say you're the CEO of your startup and you really want to be in the drug shipment space, and you go to the university and be like, hey, I really want this technology. I'm not 100% certain that this technology fully works yet, right? Yeah, you've published, that's good and all, but it hasn't gone through the robust testing that FDA would require, or DEA might require for certain shipments or whatever. Hey, let's work on an STTR application. I, as the company, will work with your professor. We'll put an application together, and I will give you guys, 40% of the budget to undergo certain, testings. Let's say that the university has those, machines or mechanisms to do the testing internally. That's what the STTR allows. It's basically a university business partnership.
And what?
However, go ahead, sorry.
What's that percentage again?
It's a 60-40. So 60% of the budget, not work, just the budget. Or, I mean, budget is relative to performance. So 60% of the budget has to go to the company, 40% goes to your institute, to the institution, the university you're working with. But I want to be very cautious in advising this. You have to make sure that the university has the equipments, the facilities that it needs in order to accomplish the goals of the project that you are setting out for them to do. If they do not, I highly recommend that you sign a license agreement or sign an option agreement or a letter of intent with the ITG, at the Invention Tech Transfer Group at the university, submit it as an SBIR. And maybe if the professor or whomever at that university wants to still work with this project, then you could bring them on as a consultant or do anything like that, and then you hire another facility, a contract facility, to do whatever testings, like a drop test and all this other stuff, right? Again, when you're thinking about SBIRs, you need to think it from a perspective of, it's not like a normal university grant, right? It's not like a professor applying for an R01 or an R21 or anything like that. These are small business grants, and they're basically graded, they're reviewed in a way that, does this make sense from a company perspective? If this bottle is supposed to go through a drop testing, and you just say, oh, we're just going to drop it in the lab, that's not a validated study. It needs to go through, under certain ISO standards or ANSI standards for dropping and shipping and all that other stuff. So no, you do not, students do, no, you don't have to be a student to be an STTR. Ultimately, you just have to find and pick a what is called a principal investigator at the university to represent you, or to represent the university, and then you would be the principal investigator at the company. So it is what is called a multiple PI plan. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So the reviewers look at your application from these main points: the significance of the project, how good is the innovation, the approach. And when I say approach, I mean, how are you going to approach what you're planning to do? The environment, and this goes back to your question, does the university have the equipments to do, what you're planning to test out? Or does any of the companies that you potentially want to hire have the equipment or the necessary environment, facilities, etc., in order to conduct certain things? Like, so for example, in my case, if I'm going to be doing sterilization validation, let's say I'm using NAMSA to do my sterilization validation, I will have to get a paper copy of their facilities, what is called the facilities and equipments page, to incorporate into my grant, so that when the reviewers see it and they say, some people have never heard of NAMSA. I mean, in the medical device world, everybody has heard of NAMSA, but to some, academicians, they probably have never heard of NAMSA. So they'll look at the facilities and equipments of NAMSA and say, oh, okay, cool. So NAMSA has these ISO standards, this regulation, this stuff, and they have all the facilities to conduct sterilization validation. Thumbs up, looks good, sounds like a good partner. Moving on to the next thing, right? And then lastly, investigators. So unfortunately, and not to get too political, unfortunately, bias is an existing thing in all types of review programs, regardless of whether it's NIH or private. And from what I've seen on a personal perspective, and this is just me trying to help the next future generation of applicants, investigators is very critical. They judge, based off of degrees sometimes, even though they shouldn't be. So there's a lot of things that you have to anticipate. And the way that I tell my clients and other startups how to anticipate this is literally by saying, we need to make sure that your team is flushed out. You have, if you're just, let's say you have no PhD, no master's, nothing, but you created this great idea, you validated it and you tested it, just like myself. I started straight out of undergrad and I didn't have a master's or a graduate degree, and we got our first SBIR. You really have to make sure that the team is solid, that they can get the job done, and that you, regardless of your age, your academic plans, etc., you can have the highest potential for succeeding in this project. So it all blends together, right? So the innovation, the significance, the approach, the environment could be great, but unfortunately, there is a risk on the investigators. If it's just a one-person team, obviously they're not going to fund, most likely they're not going to fund a one-person team, or they won't review it in a good eye. But if you have a group of people, like, yeah, you know what, I don't have a master's or PhD, right? But I have a professor, or I have this person that does have a master's and PhD, that is a KOL or a key opinion leader in the space, that does understand this stuff, and they're going to be working with me and they're going to be helping me to make sure this project is successful. It brings that level of scrutiny down tremendously. In my experience, I actually had an application where they're like, it's funny because we're engineers, so we know how to code, we know how to do all these PCB designs, and they're like, oh, we would like to see an actual expert in PCB. And I'm like, what? Like, this is ridiculous. But we had to get the expert. That's whatever makes the reviewers happy is, in my opinion, is what you should do. Don't ever argue with the reviewer. They are the people that give you that thumbs up, thumbs down. So if they're saying that, hey, we believe you need a cancer biologist, then you best add a cancer biologist to your application. So this is how I normally operate. I always put my headspace in the head of a reviewer. what are the weaknesses that they can find in my application? And if your gut's telling you like, I think the team is weak, then your team is probably weak, and you should look into adding an additional person to boost the overall application. So to move on from there, the key components is really the specific aims after the significance, innovation, and approach. This is what your milestones are going to be. So you define clear goals. You have to go sometimes in depth. It's not broad strokes like, oh yeah, we're going to just test for sterilization validation. No, you got to list out the specific ISO standard, the subsection, maybe even get a couple of definitions out of that subsection so that the reviewers understand. Because again, the reviewers are a mix of professors, academicians, and maybe a few business individuals that have gone through this process. But assume, an academic that has potentially never gone through taking their product from bench top to FDA clearance, you're going to have to educate them a little bit on the process, but you don't have to put too much effort, just enough that they understand, oh, okay, I get it. You're going to sterilize this product. You're going to validate that the material is sterilizable and that it won't leach and kill a person, right? So a lot of these can be defined within your specific aims. And if you're working on a phase 1 SBIR, I typically tell people you want your significance page or the significance section to be about a page and a half. You want your innovation section, again, a page and a half. So that's maximum 3 pages at that point. The approach is relatively like that section is maybe a half a page. And then you spend the rest of your time on specific aims, if possible, or you boost maybe the approach to a page and then 2 pages of specific aims. And that gets you to your 6 pages total. But you really want to put the effort on the specific aims because that's what they're really going to judge as well on whether you can accomplish this and whether this is even worth reviewing. So the research strategy really demonstrates the feasibility and the impact of your project. And then if you're doing a phase 2 or a fast track application, which is a phase 1 and a phase 2 combined, then the commercialization plan really needs to highlight the market potential, the impact. There's a couple of programs I'll send you. There's a link after this that shows successful SBIRs that have been accomplished, and you can kind of take a look at their commercial plans as well. So if you are still hesitant, I recommend reaching out to a program officer early on. The NIH has a really nice list, or what you could do is there's a website called reporter.nih.gov. I might be wrong on the email, but on the link, but I'm pretty sure it's correct. And you could search up somebody similar to you. There's an advanced search feature, so you could put R43, R44s. Those are like the SBIR codes. And you can look at all the list of companies that have gotten funded in your space. And when you click on one of the links, you scroll down, it will show you who the program officer at the NIH was. So you can Google their name, and they have normally an NIH website with their information on them. And then you can Google them, or you can email them, and say, hey, I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm working on this project. Here is my 1-page specific aims page. So it's a more condensed version of what you're planning to do. So introduction and maybe 1 or 2 specific aims at most for your phase 1. And you say, I would love to set up a time to see if this would fit within your organization. And if they're not the right PO for you, they'll be more than happy to connect you to the correct PO within the same institutions. Every program officer within the institution has their own project specifications that they like. Somebody might be into microfluidics. Somebody could be into, device manufacturing. So they pass around easily and quickly for you to get in front of the person that you want. And then through that meeting, you want to come off in eager to learn type of mood, no arguments, no nothing, be very respectful, because early relationships with the program officer is crucial and critical. I've heard stories where some people got a score way beyond the funding line, and the program officer is like, no, I really want this project. We're going to fund it right now. And they've had the opportunity to pull those grants in for funding. So your relationship with your program officer is critical. I'm not promising or saying that every program officer does this. In my experience, not a lot have, but having that relationship early on is going to benefit you more than later on. And then you get your ultimate feedback on the proposal fit. They might question you. They might say, have you really thought about this? I've seen a lot of these types of applications, but have you thought about testing it this way? Those are all key hints of hey, you know what? I need to be thinking about other things because maybe that's the way that I'll end up getting funded. So take the advice that you can. Obviously, they'll always tell you nothing they say is legally binding because they are federal employees. So to understand that too. But um, that's normally a good hint. So common pitfalls to avoid. This is something that I deal with on a daily basis. No matter how early you try to work on an NIH grant, there's always something happening or something being submitted on the last minute, final hour. So, real quick, NIH grants are due 5 p.m. local time. So it's not 5 p.m. EST. If you live on the East Coast, it's 5 p.m. EST. If you live on the West Coast, it's 5 p.m. PST. So it's 5 p.m. on the day of the application due date, local time. The three due dates are September 5th, January 5th, April 5th. Now, if those days fall on a weekend, for example, let's say it falls on a Sunday or a Saturday, that means you get until that following Monday to submit. So if let's say January 5th, which was this most recent one, fell on Sunday, you get to submit your grant on January 6th. However, never risk it. Try to get it in on the day that it's, the original due date, because sometimes the system fails, sometimes, the websites crash and they don't care. I mean, they gave you ample amount of time. You could do, you could ask them, you could file a report and be like, hey, no, actually, this was a systems error on NIH's part. And if you have a ticket that shows that you called ahead of time, they'll push the application through. But don't risk it. Poor alignment with NIH priorities. Let's say you just completely ignored or you didn't even research and you just pushed it through. And the reviewers are like, this has been done before. There's already, or this doesn't make sense. Nothing that you're saying here is actually important and critical. You're not going to get funded. That's the truth. Lack of clear commercialization plan. This is again fast track in phase 2. If you're just mumbling random numbers left and right, and there is no true plan on how you're going to take this from R&D stage to commercial stage, that weighs very heavily in those applications. Underestimating your competition or market barriers. Trust me, I know we all are trying to, create these most innovative projects and stuff like that. But if you just constantly say our competitors aren't doing this or they're lacking or whatever, you don't know who's on your review panels. You don't know if somebody actually has years of experience using a competing technology. Now, again, bias aside and whatever they have to do when there is bias, let's just assume everybody was biased just for this example, right? If you're talking to somebody that's already biased towards a competing technology, it's not going to work out well for you if you're just going to constantly say that technology sucks. You really have to take it up a notch and say, this is why they're failing. They've only been able to generate X millions of dollars because of A, B, and C. And reference, you don't always have to reference a scientific paper. You can reference news articles. You can reference all these things. Just obviously put it in your site, in your bibliography page, and show that this is why their marketing plan sucks, and this is how we're going to make a better marketing plan. This is our go-to-market strategy. Way better than theirs. Ours is tried and tested, and guess what? We have these individuals that are working with us, that are on the team, that have successfully done this before, and 4 different companies that have all exited out for, let's say, $1 billion each, right? That's where you really need to boost up your understanding of what is it going to take to get your product to the market. And if you don't know that right now, you should start looking into it as soon as after you submit your phase 1. You should start working on a commercialization plan regardless. And again, as I mentioned, proposing work that's already been done before in literature or funded by other grants. Again, every review panel isn't going to know what's already been done. It's new, sometimes new faces per cycle. But something that I've seen that's really, been a stick in the mud is that some reviewers are like, this has been done before. This is old news. This is, we've been doing this stuff since 1990. And they're so in that mind space that they're not able to think outside of it. And you really need to start strategizing like, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm not saying this right. Maybe I need to scrap the way I'm talking about my project altogether and really think of a new way to bring this up. Or, hey, guess what? You're right. This has been done in literature before, but did you know this hasn't been reproduced, right? There's multiple other publications that have basically counteracted the publication that you're thinking about, or that's in my case, sometimes some of the reviewers have actually cited the publication. And then I go through it and I'm like, you obviously didn't read this publication. They literally say at the conclusion statement, none of this data is significant to show that there is or there isn't a relationship, right? So some of these reviewers, again, they only have a small amount of time to review your application, and they're reviewing like 8 or 9 other applications at the same time. So you have to stand out. You have to put your aspects up in front of their eyes so that they can see it and say, oh, okay, you know what? I see what he's saying. I see what they're saying. They're doing this, this, and this. Okay, cool. Or if you don't do well on the first time, you have the ability to resubmit. And in that resubmission, you can, I wouldn't say argue, but you can respond to the critiques and say, hey, you brought up a very good point about that publication back in, let's say 2010. The team and I have looked over it, and we saw that, they stated that they have not been able to do this, but it allowed us to do more in-depth literature review. And we saw that there is no publications out there doing this specific test that we are now newly proposing. So we take back our old test, we're putting out this new test. This new test is good. Or if you have a letter from the FDA, or if you've done a pre-sub with the FDA and the FDA said, we want you to do A, B, and C, you can leverage that in your specific aims or your significance section and say, hey, we as a company have already talked with the FDA. This is what the FDA is mandating. Again, reviewers kind of go from critical to like, oh, okay, cool. The FDA is asking for it. Let's give what the FDA they want, right? Resubmission. If you don't listen to the advice and the comments of the reviewers, or you start arguing with them like, no, you're wrong, and you clearly say you're wrong, blah, 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 they're not going to be happy. They're going to be very angry with you. So you say, thank you so much for your, for your comments. We agree, or thank you so much for your opinion. We discussed this and we believe that by tweaking this, it should, answer the question and be able to do A, B, and C like you requested. You want to be very passive, but at the same time, firm in your decision, because at the same time, what's best for your company, right? You know what you need to get done, but you have to shape it in the way that reviewers truly understand, like, okay, I get what they're trying to do now. Yeah, this makes sense now. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate the fact that you listened to our comments. And then page limits. A lot of people don't understand this, but 6 pages means 6 pages. Having issues with certain pages, like a specific aims page. I've had this with one of my clients where I caught it at the last second. We were about to submit, but this is why I preview the applications before I submit. And the specific aims page, although it fit into the one page. And when I say specific aims page, you have to do a research strategy. And in that research strategy, you could use the 2-3 pages, like I mentioned, for specific aims. But they also want an executive summary version of your specific aims. And that is a separate document. It's called the specific aims page, separate from the research strategy. I had a client that had it under 1 page, and I didn't even look. I looked at the PDF and I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, 1 page, nothing cut off at the bottom. Upload it, looked at the preview of the application, and there was an extra white blank page as page number 2 for the specific aims page. And that could have killed the whole application because it will get thrown out. They do that for a reason. So be very cognizant of your page limits. Bio sketches, 5 pages maximum. Commercialization plan, 12 pages maximum. And NIH has a website that you can look up and like formats and tools and stuff like that you can look at. So accounts to create, this is very critical, and in no way, shape, or form are they in order, because I don't even remember the orders nowadays. But you want to create an SBIR.gov. I'm going based off of my current memory. SBIR.gov first. This gets you your SBC number. Then following that, you want to create a SAM.gov account. This is where you can put your banking information and stuff like that. So should you get an award, they know which bank account to send it to. Make sure that it is a business bank account. Do not put your personal bank account, please. If you're going to put personal, it might not be good for you later on, obviously, from the respect of you could potentially be stealing capital from the government by mistake. So put your business account after your SAM account gets approved. So obviously this is all an assumption that you already have your IRS number, your TIN number or EIN number. Sorry, EIN, not TIN. So if you have your EIN, do SBIR.gov, then do SAM.gov. SAM.gov does 2 validation steps. It will do an IRS EIN match, and then it will do your cage code review. So let's say you have a startup at an accelerator, and there's like 1,000 companies there, and let's say even 3 of them are applying for NIH funding and stuff like that. They don't care that you're at an accelerator. They are going to ask you like, hey, how are you different from these other 3 people? Because we see that there's 3 people at this location that also have, cage codes. You are just going to have to submit to the DLA, I think. Hey, here's my lease with this facility. This is an electrical bill or whatever. This is my my validation that I am a legitimate company and that we are just here at a physical space and it's an incubator. So that's why there's 3 other people. So they'll ask you, what's your relationship with these 3 other companies? Very, very easy, in my opinion, to get through. So once SAM.gov is approved, then you can apply for the grants.gov account. Once the grants.gov account is done, you can apply for the era.nih.gov account or the login.gov nowadays, because that's a 2-factor authentication that comes in between God knows which one of these accounts. But it will tell you like, hey, we can't make this until you make a login.gov. But the last one that's going to be made is the era.nih.gov. And this is where you'll be able to track, manage, and even utilize the application to submit your SBIRs. So originally it was through grants.gov. Now it's something called Assist. Assist falls under the era.nih.gov. So I mentioned success stories. So NIH does provide a few examples. In no way, shape, or form are you to think if I wrote my application exactly like this, it's going to get funded. These are older applications. Things change, reviewers change, but it's a nice way to just really get an example of like, hey, I could look at how things are discussed. How are things presented to the reviewers? And then tweak it and make it your own way. And then as Andrew posted in the chat, the reporter.nih.gov, really, really great tool. If you know a specific professor's name, just type their name up. And if they've gotten NIH funding in the past, you could see it. Specific companies, let's say there's a competitor and you don't know if they've gotten NIH funding in the past, type in that competitor's name, see if they have. Sometimes it might not be under the company name, but see if their CEOs or their scientific review board or whatever internally has gotten funded in the past, and that will most likely be on there. Now, Reporter, just for FYI, updates, I think, the week or 2 after a new grant has been funded. So, for example, let's say you got your funded in December 15th. It won't show up online until most likely the end of December. So there is a time delay in case your competitors or somebody else has gotten funding newly. And then we got something in the chat. Can we have a link to this presentation when we're done, either document or recording? Andrew, yeah, sure.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to send out a recording shortly after, and as Maggie said, a link to the recording will be emailed to all registered attendees.
So in conclusion, I truly believe that the NIH is a very powerful tool to drive innovation and commercialization. I believe that you should start early. You can, engage. When I say engage reviewers, I mean it in the sense of understanding their background. If you have not started your company yet, if you have not started a company yet, and you're not submitting an NIH, you can talk to reviewers. You can, reach out and be like, again, this is my opinion. So if it's in any way, shape, or form conflicts with NIH, but this is from what I've heard. If you don't have a company yet and you just want to understand how reviews work, some reviewers, you could go and potentially partner with a reviewer if they're working at an institution. And through that partnership, you say, hey, how does NIH, review panels work? What are your thoughts on it? I had a buddy of mine, he actually just got invited recently as a panel reviewer, and he's like, hey man, it's crazy. Like the amount of knowledge that I've gained, it could take one voice to swing everybody against your application. One voice. So this is why it's very critical to understand what are the reviewers trying to see, and make sure that you're not arguing with reviewers over what you're trying to do. In our early years, when we were working with the university, they were always just like, again, sometimes egos butt heads together a bit, and they're like, no, we got to keep pushing this. And I'm like, no, if the people that are willing to give you the money are saying don't do this, then don't do it, right? There's no point to push it. And thankfully at the end, cooler heads won. But you have to make sure that your team is in alignment with you. If the reviewers want to see something, then propose it. Now, again, granted, the review cycles typically change. The reviewers in the cycles typically change. But on the CSR website, which is the scientific research, I can't remember what the C stands for, but if you look up NIH CSR on Google, and through that referral tool that I mentioned to you, when you type in a little bit of what your project does, etc., they'll give you blue links on the reviewer panel. You can click that blue link, and they will give you a list of the last 3 review cycles. So almost a year before today, they'll give you a list of those reviewers. You can go through those lists. I've done it multiple times. You compile that list and you say, who are the more common people on these review panels? How many people keep showing up? And then you can look at their background and understand, like, hey, this person might be completely against my project. And you could do a little neat trick, and that is called removing them from your review. So you can actually file a conflicts of interest form or a cover page on your application that says, hey, this individual is like, our 2 fields go head to head against each other. We believe that this individual might potentially be biased against our application. We would like to remove them from our review panel. So what normally happens is that the SRO, the scientific research officer on that panel, will say, okay, reviewer 1, can you please step out for a bit? And they'll probably kick them off the Zoom call if it's a Zoom call. But if it's in person, they'll like, hey, can you please step out? The panel reviews it, and then they'll review that. They'll have the conversation with the 3 primary reviewers that you had, and they'll say yes, no, oh, I agree, okay, cool, and then they'll compile the scoring. It's not always guaranteed that they will be reviewed. They just, your SRO will say we will follow NIH policy. So what is, NIH policy is to remove them, but at the end of the day, you can never truly know whether they were or were not removed. It's anticipated that they are. And that's very critical to really try to understand who your reviewers are, who they might be. And there's a really neat sheet at the end of your application in Assist where it's called a PHS request form. This request form allows you to specifically say which panel you want to review, and you can also incorporate on that who do you not want to review your application. So there's 2 areas. You could do it in a cover sheet saying, hey, we don't want these individuals and for this reason. And you could also do it in the PHS request form. And at the end of the day, build a very strong proposal. Make sure it's not a copycat. Try to really stand out, similar to the patent world. You want your patent could be innovative and truly amazing, but if the patent officer is like, yeah, I see something from 1990 that already claims something similar to you, through that patent process, you got to convince them, no, this is the differences and stuff like that. The same thing kind of goes for the NIH process. And then we have 2 questions. Okay, cool. And then, yeah, my LinkedIn. And then if any questions, please feel free to ask.
Go ahead, Leith.
Thanks. First of all, Ahmed, sorry I was late, but I appreciate
no
the
worries.
information. So I see a lot of teams that participate in SBIR program through NSF, and some of those teams are medtech teams. So I guess my question is, and if you covered this earlier, then I apologize, but like, which teams should certain teams focus more on NIH than NSF? Like I don't, sometimes I'm curious when I see the NSF teams that are so med heavy. I'm like, wow, I would have been surprised that this was approved for SBIR through NSF as opposed to trying to go the NIH route. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, so sometimes, this is my personal opinion. In no way, shape, or form is it the views of NSF or NIH. Sometimes NIH is just too damn hard to get.
Okay.
You know, it's the company's not ready to the level that it needs to be in order to secure an NIH grant, you know, whatever it might be. So some people go through the NSF process and they'll go through the pitch, and then they'll do their pitch, and then they get that legacy program. They might do NSF I-Core and really just build up their legacy. And I personally believe that the reviewers at NSF really look for that. They're kind of, I think of the NSF reviewers as like a venture capital reviewer, or like an angel investor that's like, hey, this guy's coachable. They went through this process. They went through NSF I-Core. They interviewed 100 people, and I really like the fact that they did this. But sometimes they can be as difficult as an NIH awardee. So I've had friends, really close friends, and I'm like, let's work on an NIH project. And be like, man, I cannot for the life of me get through the NIH reviewers. And this is where I employ the techniques of, maybe you're just in the wrong panel. You have the opportunity to ask for a different panel. If you really believe that this panel does not understand your stuff, you can go about it. So this is the lack of understanding that a lot of people have. They think that when they put their application in, they have no choice whatsoever. You truly do have a choice. You can change your institution if you wanted to. If you're again, my example, if I'm proposing something in diabetes, that doesn't mean that the diabetes institution has to take it. I could give it to the National Institute for Aging. I can give it to NCATS. I can give it to musculoskeletal. I can give it to any number of institutions that fall within the, hey, we do fund this. We do all agree that you should probably go to NIDDK, the diabetes division. But if it gets a good score, yeah, we're more than happy to take it. And the same thing goes for the review panels. Some people just don't understand that, hey, the person, the CSR that's actually organizing all these grants, the system that's just ponying up all these, you know, applications, they go off of keyword functions. So they're looking for keywords in your application. They're like, oh, this guy has stated tissue engineering 50 times. Send it to the tissue engineering cohort. But it could be that you're saying tissue engineering sucks and that you believe in synthetic engineering, right? And synthetic engineering might have been maybe less accounted for in your application, and they still sent it to the tissue engineering group. And obviously, those individuals are going to be experts in tissue engineering. So if they see you proposing this new thing called synthetic tissue engineering, they're going to be like, what the hell is this? You know, I've never heard of it. Or maybe one or two people are going to be like, yeah, I've heard of this. And that's where the issues start happening. NSF, again, I do believe in the medtech space. A lot of the people that I know are more medtech SaaS enabled. So they're like wearable devices. I feel that this fits really well with NSF. It's in their wheelhouse. It can be funded in NIH. I have a buddy of mine that I told them about a program called Catalyze through NHLBI. They too are a wearable device. They've gotten maybe, I think, a few NSF funding in the past. They just got a really good review through the Catalyze program. So again, it's just understanding. Maybe you're not supposed to go through an omnibus. Maybe you're supposed to go through an RFA or a PAR like Catalyze, where it's a specific review panel that's only geared towards reviewing applications that fit a specific format, right? So that's my, you know,
Yeah.
long-winded answer to NSF and NIH.
And then one more question, and then I'll shut up.
No, please ask.
So there's been a bit of a move at NSF to move towards, I wouldn't say a requirement, but they're increasing the capacity to provide, for example, a national I-Core experience for phase 1 awardees in NSF. And in fact, some of the new language in NSF's phase 1 actually includes customer discovery training. Is there a move in NIH to do something similar, or because they have an I-Core-ish program, but is there a move at all in NIH to do something similar that you're at least aware of?
Yeah, so NIH, you can apply for I-Core after receiving a phase 1. So NIH already has an I-Core program. They mimicked it off of NSF I-Core. Just an FYI, I did NSF I-Core regional. We never got to the national perspective. One of our review guys was just really hard against medtech. He believed a lot more in the SaaS space. But regardless, NIH does have an I-Core program, $50,000 after achieving a phase 1 SBIR. They have a national conference, very similar to the NSF perspective. I believe NSF right now, I have another a gentleman that I met from a company, and he was like, hey, you know, tell me about what we could do. So we contacted the NSF I-Core regional, and they're like, hey, or sorry, national. And then he was like, hey, apply at, I think it was UC Berkeley. They have a regional center over there. Apply there and do your early customer discovery so that you could boost your application for us. So that when you submit your pitch, you could say, hey, I've already done regional. And a lot of people don't understand this, and I think this is why there's a lot more success on the NSF side, is that you get legacy through the NSF I-Corps program. You get a grant number that is assigned to your I-Corps program, which helps a lot of individuals say, hey, I've already done this. I think it increases your potential. I don't know, back in 2015 or 2016, they were telling us it increases it by like 20-30% to get chance of securing a phase 1 SBIR. But I think they're slowly starting to get there. Obviously, there's a lot of things moving and shaking right now at the NIH's side this week with the news of the pausing on funding and certain review panels being canceled. Which, by the way, guys, I'm sorry, this was not in any way, shape, or form prepared for that. So please make sure that your review panel is actually still active. If you fall under a certain panel, you will know it's not active if it doesn't have a SRO assigned on the website. So a few of my clients have emailed me and they're like, hey, I got this email, it's canceled. So what do I do? And they're like, okay, well, we're going to find a new panel to go to. But again, I think very synergistically about NSF and NIH. I think a lot of people don't understand though with NSF is that a phase 1 regardless still requires a commercialization plan to be into the research strategy. If I'm not mistaken, about 15 pages is the research proposal. And to some early stage startups, they don't understand the commercialization aspect yet. So this is why they're more heavily geared towards go do I-Corps so that you can answer that specific section of your proposal. And the people that do it, they're good at it and they're successful at it. And props to them for sure.
Cool. Thank you, Ahmed.
No, thank you.
And Rinku, you just joined, but we will be sending out a link to the video recording of this session. So if you have any wild questions that made you want to come in at the last minute, go for it.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So are there any, excuse me, are there any industries that are frowned upon or not likely to get funding from these institutions?
It's a very good question. And again, this is my own personal opinion. In no way, shape, or form is it an opinion of the NIH or any other federal government institution. I think supplements, I think, things that are not regulated by FDA or other institutions, I think have a harder time. If you are developing it as like, hey, you're going to do a clinical trial and you've done a different composition of a supplement, what different dosage, I don't know. And you've shown, in animal models, early animal models, that it does something, beneficial therapeutically, then yeah, I think that's fine. Obviously, again, not to get into too deep of a political perspective, but keep an eye out on what's going on in government and in Congress and in the executive branch, because if they, for example, if a certain institution is canceled or merged with another institution, then certain types of grants and certain types of projects might not be fundable anymore. So I tell people always to keep up with current events and make sure that you stay on top of it to understand, hey, what's happening at the NIH, what's happening, there. I know last year or a year or two ago, one of the new directors of NIH is like, hey, we're moving away from animal studies. Now, granted, animal studies are still going to be funded and done all that, but they had a plan to eventually move away from animal studies. So what does that mean? Well, most, if not all, potential in vivo models will most likely need it to be done on what is called lab on a chip or organs on a chip, right? So if you're targeting, let's say, prostate cancer, you're going to have to grow prostate cancer on this, microfluidic lab and environment that mimics the human body, and then insert your drug and see what it does. So you want to be very cautious about what's going on in the sphere of government and politics. That kind of just helps you stay on top of it.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thanks so much.
You're
Go ahead,
welcome.
Andrew.
Yes, thank you so much, Ahmed. It was a great talk, and thank you everyone who joined. Like we mentioned, we will be sending out the recording, and we'll send out the slides as well, if that's okay with you, Ahmed.
Yeah, by all means, please
Perfect.
share, and more than happy to, if you were shy or whatever on this call, feel free to reach out to me, and more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Ahmed. It was very informative. And in the email that we send out, you all will also receive info about our next SBIR speaker session that we will be having. That one is going to focus on the NSF.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You guys all take care. And thanks for your time, Ahmed.
Likewise. Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.